All right, well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and Jens, and we'll get going, and we may have some others joining us within the next few minutes. But my name is Meredith. I am the Conservation Program Manager at Stowe Land Trust. I'm joined here by my colleague, Barry. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Barry.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Barry Matthews. I'm the Community Engagement Manager. Excuse me. I'm happy to have you here.
Yeah, and we're excited to host Jens Hilke of Vermont Fish and Wildlife as he talks about the Shutesville Hill Wildlife Corridor and the partnership around that. So I'm just going to hand it off to Jens, and he can introduce himself and give a brief overview of what he'll be talking about tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Meredith and Barry, for hosting tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Again, my name is Jens Hilke. I'm a conservation planning biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and I'm just going to share my screen and get started. We will have time at the end for any sort of questions or comments that you might have. So you can also feel free to use the chat to log those as I'm going, but we're going to go ahead and handle those at the end. All right. All right, great. Well, here we go. So tonight I wanted to talk about Shutesville Hill as a regionally important wildlife road crossing. Tonight's presentation is sponsored by the Shutesville Hill Wildlife Corridor Partnership, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife is just one partner among many in this partnership, and I'll introduce the full list to you at the end. But it's such a pleasure to be here with you and to see some familiar faces around the virtual table tonight. So you have already passed the first test of logging into the Zoom system. Please do go ahead and mute your microphones and just make sure they stay muted during the course of the webinar. There are not too many of us, so at the end, if you can ask questions and unmute your mic. This video is being recorded, and so it should just show my screen, but if you're worried about it, go ahead and turn off your videos. And again, there's that chat function as a way of logging questions as I'm going. So before I go too far, I just want to tell you a little bit more about where I'm coming from as a staffer with the Fish and Wildlife Department. At Vermont Fish and Wildlife, we believe in the conservation of fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the people of Vermont. It's a huge mission. It takes us in a variety of different directions. My job is to coordinate the department's community wildlife program. And so I provide technical assistance to all 251 Vermont towns, all 11 regional planning commissions, and various conservation NGOs in Vermont. I've worked with the towns of Stowe and Waterbury many times over the years, and am anxious and happy to continue to work with towns wherever they need me. The Community Wildlife Program is engaged in all manner of different conservation activities, helping to support the planning process by helping towns understand more about their ecological and community context, providing interpretation of mapped resources, as well as presentations and workshops like this. So I am happy to continue to help, and if your town is interested, feel free to give me an email and I can get engaged. So I think the most important thing to begin with is about celebrating this place. And here's a picture of the Worcester Range. And I just want to express what a unique area Central Vermont is, and Shutesville Hill in particular. But you know, over the years, the department has talked about the Worcester Range and the Shutesville Hill corridor as a linchpin in Central Vermont. This incredibly important large forest block that is really critical to a larger regional understanding. So I think you all, as many of you are residents, probably have any number of reasons to to celebrate where you live. And I'm hoping tonight I can give you yet another reason why you should celebrate this place. I hope that we can see this place, the Shutesville Hill Corridor, in a slightly different context, maybe zoom out a little bit more than you're accustomed to from driving the roads and exploring the forests and trails in your community. So I'll start with this map, and what you see here is the red lines. I'll just let me just kind of point it. The red line here, that's the Stowe Waterbury town line. And the yellow is the area of interest with the larger Shutesville Hill corridor. And then the green is conserved lands. So here at left is the Mansfield State Forest, and at right is the C.C. Putnam State Forest. And so you can see that there's an incredible amount of conserved land on both sides of what we call Shutesville Hill. And then there's a lot of development in the area. So Shutesville Hill is actually just one hill right here on the Waterbury-Stowe line that you encounter on Route 100. Right near there's a person that does chainsaw carving from wood, and just up the hill there is Shutesville Hill. And so, but we're using that term Shutesville Hill to include this whole area that we're talking about in yellow, the Bar Hill block, that whole area of Route 100 and all the associated roads there in that yellow. So this area is really striking as pretty unique in Vermont. So I often think about these issues in terms of forest blocks, right? These areas of natural cover that are surrounded by roads, development, and agriculture. So I'm not talking about public land or private land now. I'm just talking about land cover and where there are forests, where there's areas of natural cover. And so the map you can see on screen is shaded by size. So the largest forest blocks, as you can see, are along the spine of the Green Mountains, up in the Northeast Kingdom. And then there are a few here in the Piedmont, the Groton State Forest, and up into Steam Mill Brook in that area. But generally, our largest forest blocks are here along the spine of the Greens. And then in the valleys in between, we tend to have a lot of development. And so Vermont has these sort of north-south ridges and then north-south valleys. And we tend to let our ridge lines stay forested, and we tend to develop pretty heavily in our valleys. So as we zoom in, thinking about this idea of where there are forest blocks, please appreciate this spot here, right? And so again, these are colored by size. So you can see that Mansfield block is huge. And you can see the Worcester block, the C.C. Putnam State Forest and associated forest, private forest around there is also huge. And so what we're talking about is this area in between and the connections between these large forest blocks. Now, just thinking about forest, there are benefits of large forests. So I live in Burlington, right? And I love my street trees. My street trees add property value to my house. They provide natural air conditioning. So I get some benefit from just having a few trees around. But as we start thinking about forests and the benefit of larger forests, the range of benefits we get from that increase exponentially. So larger forest blocks are going to have more biological diversity than smaller forest blocks. So that Mansfield block, that Worcester block, those are hubs for biological diversity. Larger forest blocks allow for scenery. They help clean the air and water. They provide working lands for the forest industry and the economic benefits that come with that. As well as the economic benefits of recreation and tourism. Larger forest blocks prevent erosion and reduce flooding. They provide land for hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing. In Vermont alone, that's something like $685 million to the Vermont economy. Larger forest blocks transmit fewer tick-borne illnesses. And of course, they sequester carbon and absorb harmful gases. So just the location of Shutesville Hill in proximity to these huge forest blocks is pretty important for your quality of life because of the benefits that these large forest blocks give our communities. Now, I also want to think about forest blocks in a slightly different way as places of climate resilience. Now, what I'm showing on screen is the Vermont conservation design. And Vermont conservation, there's a lot to say about VCD, Vermont conservation design. And I could talk about it for hours on end, but I won't bore you. But I just want to think about forest blocks in the context of climate resilience. So not only are these large forest blocks places where we're going to have more biological diversity and scenery and all those values, but they're also places where there's diversity in the physical landscape, like the mix of slope and aspect, bedrock geology, those physical characteristics of a forest. Well, those places that have diversity in the physical landscape are going to have, and already do have, diversity in the biological landscape. So they have species diversity. And more importantly, they're going to continue to have biological diversity into the future. So I just want to add one more value to these forest blocks, that these are the hubs of climate resilience. And so in Vermont conservation design, we talk about wanting to keep our forests. We want to keep a pattern to our forests. And you can see the map, the VCD map on screen. There's a pattern to it. It's contiguous. It connects from north to south, from east to west. And we want to keep our forest blocks intact, diverse, and connected. And these are places where we get carbon mitigation, we get carbon sequestration, carbon storage, as well as resilience and adaptation. And here we can talk about that just from a wildlife standpoint, that these are places where wildlife can adapt to climate change by moving their ranges in response to a warming climate. So these large forest blocks are important as homes for biological diversity and also as connection points for wildlife species to adjust their ranges. Now let's just zoom back in on Shutesville Hill. And so here is that same Vermont conservation design map for the area of Shutesville Hill. And again, I'll orient you. And you can see the Waterbury-Stowe line. You can see Route 100 there in red. You can see the unbroken forest cover of the Mansfield Range at left and the Worcester Range at right. And you can see the roads that bisect this area. And so in Vermont conservation design, the dark green are the highest priority areas from that landscape scale. And the light green are priority areas of that landscape scale. And then there are areas that aren't colored, and those are not considered statewide priorities. But this is a statewide prioritization. And so of all of the forest blocks, of all 4,052 forest blocks in Vermont, look at this area and look at how important ecologists consider this area from that statewide perspective. And you can also, just as a little bit of foreshadowing to a later point, you can really see how close together those highest priority forest blocks get here in this area of Shutesville Hill. Now, Vermont conservation design is the overall prioritization. We can break that up into parts and components. And one of those components is connectivity blocks. And so these are the areas of the contiguous forest in Vermont that that provide, that allow for wildlife movement from the Adirondacks to the Greens to the White Mountains, up to the Suttons, down to the Berkshires. They're contiguous forests. And so here in dark orange, you can see those highest priority connectivity blocks, again, from that statewide scale. And then the brown are priority forest blocks, connectivity blocks at that landscape scale. Again, you can see just how important this area is from that perspective of connectivity. I'm going to zoom out in a second and give you a little bit larger view, but I just really wanted to zoom in and show you the specifics of, even even these smaller blocks, they're just absolutely highest priority at this, even with this statewide prioritization. So here, let me just zoom out a second. And you can see here in blue, the Shutesville Hill crossing on Route 100. But you can see that pattern to it. And so the crossing on Route 100 is really the only place where there's forest on both sides of Route 100 in the towns of Waterbury, Stowe, and Morristown. Really, this is it. So this is the connection between the main spine of the Greens, that Worcester block, that Mansfield block, and the Worcester Range. And I hope you picked up on it earlier that, from a wildlife connectivity perspective at the regional scale, if you go due north along the Mansfield Range, when you hit the Canadian border, that kind of ends. And so really to achieve forest connectivity, wildlife populations need a little bit more of a northeasterly trajectory, i.e. through along the Worcester Range. So this connection from the main spine of the Greens over to the Worcesters is a really important one. Now let me just show you the same area as an aerial photo. Okay, and so again, here's Route 100. Down here is the turn to Moscow Road. Up here's the lower village. And I just want you to think about this landscape from the perspective of some of the species that move around a lot to get what they need. Black bear, they've got a home range of 30 square miles. So they move around a lot to get what they need. In the spring, they might go down to wetlands with some of the first plants to green up. In the late summer, they might use power lines and look for berries along some of the open patches. In the fall, they might go up to ridge lines and look for beech nuts or acorns. So they're using different food sources at different times of the year to get what they need. And they're moving around a lot to meet those needs. Similarly, moose have a home range between 2 and 20 square miles. They're moving elevationally quite a bit over the course of the year. A river otter is going to have a home range of 15 to 30 linear miles. So here I'm talking about connectivity along a stream and what that and that contiguous habitat along streams. Male bobcats have a home range of 27 square miles in the Champlain Valley. Average male bobcat moves about 19 miles per day. Females are moving about 12 miles per day. Again, species like this have big home ranges. They're moving around to get what they need, and they're utilizing different food sources at different times of the year. So let's just think about this same landscape through the eyes of these species that are moving around. Now, I had talked about that Mansfield block. Well, it's actually a 72,000 acre forest. So that is home to a variety of individual animals and populations. Now, the mountain road there in the upper part of this slide is closed in the winter. There's minimal traffic. There's opportunities for crossing. So the proximity of the Madonna block, which is an additional 32,000 miles, those two forest blocks are pretty connected. because the road's closed and they're maintain some ability to cross the road, certainly in the winter. So you can think of these two blocks as functioning as if it's a 104,000 acre block, right? Remember, I talked about forest blocks. We want them to be intact, connected, and diverse. And so we're seeing that the intactness of the Mansfield block at 72,000 acres. And now we're beginning to see them as connected, right? The Madonna block, the Mansfield block, they're connected. And so they're offering, they're behaving as if they're one block. Now here's the C.C. Putnam, the Worcester block that includes the C.C. Putnam State Forest. And so if this, as long as this Shutesville Hill crossing remains viable, well, we're adding another 45,000 acres to this connected network. And so these blocks aren't just behaving as if they are islands in a sea of development. They're an interconnected network. And so wildlife species like that bear and the moose that we talked about can move between these blocks to meet their needs over the course of the year. At some parts of the year at higher elevation, at other parts of the year at lower elevation, meeting their needs, different food sources at different times of the year. So I just want you to think about how important the proximity of these two blocks is for your quality of life and the importance really of Shutesville Hill. Now, let me just do a little historical tour of this area and show you what's happened over the last 60 years or so. So here's an aerial photo. Again, I'll orient you. This is Route 100. So I'm just south, actually, slightly south of where that last aerial photo is. So this is Route 100. That's the turn for Moscow Road. And so we're just, you know, I want to concentrate on this forest block at center. Now, I colored what I consider to be forest in green for you. And so you can see that here in 1962, this forest block is pretty connected, both east to west, left to right, across the screen, right to left, whatever, and north to south, right? And now bear in mind, in the late 1800s, Vermont was about 20% forest. So in the 1960s, we're still seeing reforestation after that all-time low. And then by about the 70s or 80s, we peak at about 70, 80%, about 80% forest cover. And now we're beginning to drop again. So anyway, I'm just putting this 1962 date in context for you, that this is still at the time of reforestation. But look what's happened here in this area. In 1974, you can see that a few roads have started to go in. By 1980, a couple more longer roads have come in. 1996, there's a big change here. You can see a lot of these residences that went in. Each one seems to have their own pond, and you can see that the pattern that is starting to make on the landscape, a more fragmented pattern. Okay, here we are in 2007 and 2011. Now, you'll notice that this area is not colored, and that is trees. You know, you're absolutely right. These are trees, but this is a small fragment of trees completely surrounded by roads and development. So I'm not calling it forest anymore because of its size and because of the character of the residential forest. But the overall amount of green on these slides between 1962 and 2011 hasn't changed across the 5 slides that I showed you. There was some reforestation down here that you might not have noticed, and then we lost forest here. But the most important change in the slides that I've just shown you is one of pattern. This block is no longer connected north to south in the same way that it was. It remains to be seen if it's going to maintain connections east to west. So what's changed most fundamentally is the pattern. And so I'm not just talking about trees, I'm talking about forests, and I'm talking about forests that are intact, connected, and diverse. And this forest is increasingly unconnected from that larger network that I showed you. And so that's the danger here, is that forest fragmentation is going to substantively change the overall pattern. We still have lots of trees in Vermont. That's not the issue. The issue is that we want those trees as larger chunks. We want those trees as forests to be maintained, intact, connected, and diverse. Okay, so here at Shutesville, there are a variety of threats. And so I've just talked a lot about forest fragmentation and habitat loss that's associated with sprawling development. Intrusive activities. Well, people on the landscape are a great and wonderful thing. I highly encourage all of us to get outside and enjoy it. And that's what keeps conservation going. So I'm not anti-people, but I will say that there's a dark side of too many people. And you can go by that old adage of, every snowflake in an avalanche pleads not guilty. And so some of our recreational activities, as they become super intense and everybody starts doing them, do have a negative impact on the landscape. And that's one of the threats here in this area, those sorts of intrusive activities. We can also talk about increased traffic volume and speed as a real threat. I'm going to go through this on the next slide in quite a bit of detail and show you just one study from Route 100. But as we make our roads smoother, the traffic speed increases. And then we tend to make the roads wider because we want them to be safer. And then as they become wider, we can accommodate even more traffic volume. And so the traffic side of things is a real threat in this area. And then we can also just talk about barriers to wildlife, and where, yes, the road and also houses and even barking dogs. And so, this area is threatened because there are a lot of us that love it and a lot of us that live there. And so we just need to be aware of that sort of balance that we need in the landscape. So the Shutesville Hill Wildlife Road Crossing was really named for Route 100, right? That place on Shutesville Hill. And a credit to Walt Looney for this photo of a moose on Route 100. Incredible that we still see moose in this area because of the traffic volume. So the average traffic volume on Route 100 is measured in average annual daily traffic, and that's about 12,000 vehicles per average annual daily traffic. So 12,000 cars per day, averaged out over the course of the year. So on Route 100, the Agency of Transportation did a traffic count to get actual numbers on how many vehicles were crossing. And here's what we found. Average of, as was modeled, 12,176 vehicles every day. That's about 507 vehicles per hour, or about 8.5 vehicles per minute. Let's just let those numbers sink in for a second. 8.5 vehicles per minute. Now think about yourself as that moose on the side of Route 100. What you don't see is his head going back and forth as car after car after car zips past. In wildlife biology, the distance between cars, you want about at least 60 seconds or greater between the rear bumper of one and the front bumper of the next as a possible window to cross, right? And so we found that daytime use of Route 100 is pretty heavy, and there were only 19 gaps during the daylight hours that were 60 seconds or longer. And most of those gaps were on the weekend, and they were fairly short. Now, the duration of time comprised of traffic gaps greater than 60 seconds is about 0.8% of total daytime. So there's a very small fraction of time during daylight hours where you get any significant gap in traffic that can allow for wildlife movement. Now, crepuscular hours, dawn and dusk, are the most important for wildlife movement. And those shift over the course of the year, right? Depending on the season. So that's a little bit more difficult to track, but pretty routinely, the dawn period was not as severely trafficked as dusk, but there's still a substantial amount of traffic. And then night, of course, is the least busy time on Route 100, but still a significant amount of traffic. So this isn't going anywhere. Well, this isn't going to change. If anything, this is just going to increase. And so we need to be aware that, you know, that's just a fundamental truth of our lives, that we have traffic and it's increasing. And there's not a lot of options on Route 100 to respond to that. But I just wanted, we're in the section of threats, and I just wanted to put a finer point on what traffic looks like there on Route 100. Some of the other roads within that larger Shutesville Hill area see much, much less traffic, and it's much easier to cross. And so I really, for this particular threat, I've really zoomed in on the toughest. Now, let me just switch to a different area to illustrate a point. This is the northern part of Shelburne Pond, and this is Route 116. On our way up, this is the big turn on 116, if you're familiar, going up to Shelburne and Cheese Factory Road. And the yellow dots that you see on the screen are bobcat telemetry points, right? That's a GPS collar on a bobcat for every 20 minutes for where a bobcat moved over the course of 6 months. And so you can see that bobcat spent a lot of time in the forest, a lot of time in the open wetland. But for the bobcat, that hedgerow, this tree line, was sufficient cover to move between this area of good habitat and that area of good habitat. Now, I'm not saying it was fun, I'm not saying it hung out there, but it was sufficient for moving between the forest blocks. And so these sort of micro connectors are sufficient for a bobcat. A black bear would likely want some, wider forest. But I'm trying to get at this concept of the most local scale of a wildlife road crossing, and really putting some attention to, at that micro level, how do we get animals across the road? Because again, animals are adjusting their ranges in the face of a changing climate. And so they're not going to sweat to death. They're going to die crossing the road and getting hit. So we need some attention to these micro crossings, these wildlife road crossings, and that most fine scale of habitat connectivity. Now, I've already shown you this, the habitat, the connectivity blocks in Vermont conservation design. And so we can think about this as a wildlife highway, right? This is how wildlife connect from Massachusetts to Quebec, from New York to New Hampshire. These are the forests in Vermont that allow for that movement at that ecoregional scale. And of course, I put Shutesville Hill right at the center of that map. It really shows up. I'll remove my red dot lines here, but it really shows up at this scale as well. And then lastly, there's this scale. We can think about it on the scale of the entire northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion. So from the Tug Hill Plateau in New York up to the Gaspé Peninsula, and this massive scale of the northern forest, what we call the northern forest. What I'm showing you on screen now is a map from the Staying Connected Initiative that focuses on eco-regionally significant linkage areas. So these are places between core forest that are seeing some development and are critically important connectivity areas at this eco-regional scale. Now, I want you to understand that Vermont is this crossroads at this eco-regional scale, right? So look at how many of those linkage areas are in Vermont. And so Vermont's forest pattern and what we do to maintain that connected forest across our state has implications for connectivity across this entire Northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion. So all of these different scales matter. And Shutesville shows up at each one of them, from that microcrossing, and I know I'm using a Shelburne Pond example, but I could just as easily show you this from Shutesville, to that connectivity block at that scale, to this eco-regional scale. And so Shutesville Hill stands as a critically important example at all of these scales of what connectivity looks like. Now, I just mentioned staying connected, and I just wanted to talk to just show you a couple slides about the Staying Connected initiative. And it's a public-private partnership. So state agencies, NGOs, focused on sustaining habitat connectivity for wildlife and people across that whole Northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion. And Staying Connected uses this multi-pronged approach. And so I've shown you a lot of the conservation science that we use. Then we have partners like Stowe Land Trust, like Vermont Land Trust, like other land protection, Nature Conservancy, other land protection partners that are working with willing landowners to do land protection, to donate land conservation easements, and work on that land protection side of things. The partnership is involved in land use planning, and that's where I come in. I have worked with the Planning Commission in Stowe and the Planning Commission in Waterbury. I've worked with planning commissions all over Vermont, thinking about land use planning and how do we incorporate that science into our planning of where we want development and where we don't. Then the partnership has all manner of staff that are involved in community outreach and engagement. We're partners with all of the transportation agencies in all of the US states, as well as the Quebec provinces. And our agency of transportation has actually been a really great partner in thinking about road ecology and how to safely move wildlife over or preferably under the roads. And I'll talk more about that in a couple slides. And then, another prong is sort of institutionalizing connectivity through policy. So the partnership works at these different scales, and there are different partners involved in different scales. And so at the Shutesville Hill scale, that linkage scale, we have local partners like the two regional planning commissions, Central Vermont and Lamoille County Regional Planning Commission, the local conservation commissions in Stowe and Waterbury, some of the NGOs that I talked about earlier, the Stowe Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, and then of course a whole suite of state agencies. At the state level, there's a broader representation of partners, and then at that eco-regional level steering committee, there's an even bigger list. Now, why I'm telling you this is because for this across this huge partnership on the scale of binational scale, Shutesville Hill continues to show up as a priority. And so you can get more information about Staying Connected on the Staying Connected website, and Shutesville Hill has its page embedded there in the Staying Connected website. So I'm just trying to impress upon you just how important this place is, not only to you and your lives, but at several different scales. And just how important a partnership, a binational partnership like Staying Connected, finds Shutesville Hill. Now, the mission of the Shutesville Hill Partnership is to protect and enhance the ecological function and habitat connectivity of the Shutesville Hill corridor. The partnership has been at it for quite a while now. I think we're probably in our 5th year. I don't actually know exactly. But I want to talk a little bit more about how what we're doing to keep the Shutesville Hill Wildlife Corridor open and safe. Excuse me. So first of all, we've been engaged in doing a series of public events. What you see on screen, some of you I think were there. This is a December 2017 Shutesville Hill presentation that we did at the Green Mountain Club. And you can see the former executive director of Stowe Land Trust there, Caitlin. And so we've been at this for a long time, and we've been talking to people in this region for a long time, trying to make clear how important this area is. So what can you do? Well, one of the things is support forest and forest management. And so, you know, part of that in Vermont, in my opinion, is also supporting working forests. And that, you know, using a working forest as a tool, as an economic tool to be able to keep forest on the landscape. So it's not just forest for those who can afford it, but forest as a source of income, and that will help keep forest on the landscape, will help keep those benefits coming. Not just economic, but biological diversity and scenic and all the others. I had talked about land protection. Well, another thing you can do is donate easements. So here's a slightly more zoomed in map of that Shutesville Hill area, and you can see some of the conservation easements that have happened in this area. Some critically important ones right in the pinch point. And so the Shutesville Hill Partnership has been tremendously successful in engaging willing landowners in this type of land protection work. And I encourage you to get involved in that way. Another thing is the use value appraisal program, the current use program. And you can see just how much of the highest priority land here in the Shutesville Hill corridor is already in the UVA program. And so there's opportunity for more enrollment in UVA, some of these other areas. And so that's another way that you can get involved in supporting the Shutesville Hill corridor. Another idea is further incorporating the corridor into municipal and regional plans. So there is mention of Shutesville Hill in the town plans in Stowe and Waterbury. I think we can do more both in the town plans and in the regulations to appropriately recognize the importance of the corridor and to limit development in places that are most important for connectivity. So I think there's a lot of room to make more strides at the municipal level. And so you all as landowners in this area can encourage your planning commission to take this one step further. You can encourage your regional planning commission to take this understanding one step farther in the regional plan. So I think there's a lot to do here in terms of strengthening the town plan language, and most importantly, your regulations, those zoning bylaws and other and subdivision and so forth that control where development happens, to make sure that we're developing in the places that are most appropriate and that aren't sabotaging these other values that are so important. Another thing that we together can do is appropriately sized transportation infrastructure. Now, this is a photo of a bear moving through a large culvert, and you'll see that there's dry ground where the bear is traveling. So this is an appropriately sized culvert, right? The stream, you don't even see the stream on this photo really. There's a little bit down here and a little bit of wet ground here. But appropriately sized means that at normal flow levels, there's the stream and then there's dry ground on both sides. So that allows for wildlife movement through the culvert under the road system. Now at Shutesville Hill proper, that is a state highway, there isn't actually any infrastructure that we can over or appropriately size. So that's our usual go-to strategy when working with wildlife road crossings, is we look for the infrastructure and then we appropriately size it. Here, we don't have that option. But in the rest of the corridor, there is lots of opportunity for municipally owned infrastructure to be appropriately sized. Most of our municipal infrastructure is inadequately sized to allow for floodwaters, and hence inadequately sized to allow for wildlife movement. So there's a lot of room here for us as citizens to encourage our town to appropriately size transportation infrastructure, so that we don't keep having to replace it every time there's a flood, so that it does allow for the movement of water and ice and debris, and at normal flow levels, wildlife. So I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the things we can do to support the Shutesville Hill crossing. Again, I just want to thank our partners in the Shutesville Hill partnership, and especially thank the Stowe Land Trust for hosting this webinar tonight. It is, over the years, it has been such a pleasure to work with this group of partners. They are so focused on empowering the local citizens to do work, and also to do their part in bringing Shutesville to the next level. It's been a real treat to work with the Shutesville Hill partnership, and I'd encourage you all to get involved as well. So on my way out, I'll just share one old photo of Waterbury looking up towards Shutesville from 1910. I just love these old photos, and even then you can see that connected forest cover up at Shutesville, and then just how little forest cover there was lower down. Okay, so that's all I have for you tonight in terms of prepared slides. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Is there anything in the chat? No. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute their mic and ask away. I'm happy to answer.
I have a question.
Please feel free.
I was wondering, since Route 100 is a state road, if there could be things done in the meantime, like more signage, blinking lights, lower speed limit through there. Because just last week at the top of Shutesville Hill on heading towards Stowe, it would have been on the right, just above the bear carving place. There was a beautiful, beautiful red fox hit by a car. And it was so sad because it was obviously a fox that had survived quite a while to get to be that size. And it broke my heart to see that. And people coming to this state don't understand the wildlife corridor in there so much. And I was wondering if the state can do something temporarily.
Yeah, I think it's Barbara, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Barbara. So here's the thing. The signs, they don't work. I wish they did. But really, there's no evidence at all that they change driver behavior. They really don't. No one slows down when they see those crossing signs. There is really like less than a percent point difference when you put up those signs in terms of driver behavior. They really do not alter driver speed at all. And the other, and so that's one of the issues. And so really, I'm strongly encouraging, the only time we put up signs is with the hope that there's some larger educational benefit, but it really doesn't help the wildlife. It's just, we're hoping that in the grand scheme of things, people say, oh, well, I guess wildlife do cross roads, but there's really no effect from signage on slowing cars down. Then we have explored changing the traffic speed. And I'm going to get into the weeds here, so forgive me. The town of Stowe suggested it right in that stretch by Moscow Road, and VTrans did not allow it. And here's why. When you, so traffic speed is set at 80% of what's comfortable, right? So yes, they base the speed limit based on what people are driving. So if you lower the speed limit, you effectively create two classes of drivers. One that's going what's comfortable, higher than the speed limit, and then the other that's actually going the speed limit. But when you have a 2-lane road like Route 100, and you create that scenario of having cars that are going 2 different speeds, it makes it very likely that the faster moving cars will attempt to pass the cars that are going the speed limit. So you actually increase the risk of vehicle-to-vehicle head-on collisions in places where you lower that speed limit. So I know that's complicated. It's not the answer I wanted to hear, for sure. But the changing the speed limit business is a fickle beast, because you do increase the safety risk to traffic. So there's some complicated stuff there. So there are no easy solutions for that Route 100, that stretch of Route 100 in terms of wildlife crossing.
What about flashing lights with a sign like you have at schools, where you would maybe turn them on during those peak periods you were talking about at, you know, whenever the peak periods were?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. That's a good point. And the flashing signs do have slightly better effect on slowing cars down, but only when it's actually tied to when there's wildlife on the roads. So there is technology for flagging you might have a beam of light going beside the road, and if an animal crosses that beam of light, it will trigger the big flashing lights to go off. The problem is those have been tried in states where they don't have a lot of snow. So the effect of having the flashing light, it won't slow drivers down over the long haul unless they then see the animal on the road. So anyway, we need better technology to make it so that those lights flash when there's animals crossing the road. Again, there are no easy answers. We're working on it. Lastly, I'll just bring up, the idea of an overpass is another one. And overpasses are used quite a bit out west, where you effectively have a bridge for wildlife over the road. And that's something we've toyed with at Shutesville, where it's generally our strategy in Vermont is underpasses, right? We want underpasses where they meet multiple values. They pass floodwater and debris and ice jams. The overpass really only works for wildlife, and it really only works for species that like open spaces. And so out west, that's pronghorn antelope and grizzly bear. We don't have those species here. So only maybe moose and bear would benefit from an overpass. Other species wouldn't necessarily benefit. They'd feel more comfortable going under the road. And then the other issue with the overpass is you really need to fence. You need to fence it so that it funnels wildlife to the overpass. And best practices are that you fence for 5 kilometers on both sides of that overpass to funnel wildlife. I think we have a few hundred meters before the next driveway. So again, we don't have a lot of great options in that Shutesville crossing. It's not for a lack of trying. It's not for a lack of exploring ideas. It's just that particular location, there's not a lot of options. V-Trans has been very willing to work with us and explore those ideas. We just can't find any good solutions.
Can you answer one more question? I didn't quite understand your explanation about the underpass, why it doesn't exist in the Shutesville Hill area.
Yeah, there is no existing structure that moves moves water, right? It's a hill, so there's no streams that go under there. It's shallow to bedrock. So it would be prohibitively expensive to try and dig some sort of tunnel under there. And even if we did, there's no guarantee that animals would use it because it would be dark. And so part of the trick of making an underpass is making it light enough that animals would move through there. So again, it's just not a great option. Other comments, questions, thoughts? I'm really happy to dive in. We have a couple more minutes. Jane Brown writes, what about a flashing sign showing the driver their actual speed next to the state's posted speed? Yeah, I mean, that could certainly work, but you know, what's the speed limit there on Shutesville? It's still a 50, right? And so I'm not sure that even that would significantly reduce the rates of wildlife vehicle collisions. But go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, hi, Jens.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. These kind of signs are electric signs, and they've been used more and more on town roads. And they found they're very effective because it, just right in your face as a motorist, you see that you are going 10 miles over the speed limit or something like that. And I would think, I'll be honest, I don't recall if it is 50 there from a speed, but I think if you tried that, they're fairly unobtrusive. They're not huge signs. I don't know if VTrans would go for it, but if you had the state police out there also giving out a few tickets, I think the word would get around pretty quick. I think you're right that we have a lot of people, especially a lot of new people moving to the area, and they have no idea. They just do not understand in any way, shape, or form. It's not that long a stretch on Route 100, and people are commuting to work or whatever. Their minds are 1,000 miles away. And I've never seen a moose up there. I know Walt took that picture, but I've seen one not very far away down by the grist mill. Anyway, we got to do something, I think. So just a thought.
Yeah, Jane, I hear you, but you know, when you saw that traffic, when you saw the actual gaps, 0.8%, 0.8% of daylight hours having gaps of greater than 60 seconds. I'm not sure that there's much benefit to wildlife for enforcing speed during the day. It's those crepuscular hours, the dawn and dusk, that are most important, and we're not going to get the state police. It's not safe to do traffic stops at that time of day. But I hear you.
Right.
We need to slow the speed.
Maybe that's why one of those electric signs would work, because it's sort of a self-monitoring thing.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We do need to do something, and I don't know what it is. So that's a good idea.
But thanks for the information about the fact that it's really at dawn and dusk. That's interesting. Thanks.
One more minute. Any other burning questions or thoughts?
Jens, what are some ways that if folks are interested, they can continue to stay involved with this wildlife corridor project, or contribute to work with the partnership?
Yeah, I think, continuing to hear about these sorts of activities through Stowe Land Trust and other partners, keeping your eye on the events page at Stowe Land Trust, I think, is a really helpful way of learning more about these sorts of events. The partnership has done all manner of bird walks and forestry walks, and we'll continue. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus for COVID safety, but here in a bit that will be ramping back up, and we're really anxious to get back outside with you all to continue this conversation about this important place. So, with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Meredith. Thank you all so much for your time tonight. It's been a real pleasure being with you.
Yeah, and I want to say thanks to Jens. That was an excellent presentation. It was my first time watching that, so I learned a lot and thought it was really well done. And I can't thank you all enough for coming tonight. If you have any questions for Stowe Land Trust, for Barry and I, or for Jens, you can send them to Stowe Land Trust, and we'll make sure they find the right person. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys out in the field sometime this spring or summer.
Take care, everybody.
Great. Thanks. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.